On the outskirts of a quiet village, there was a humble farmer named Harun. He was known for his hard work and dedication to the land, growing the best potatoes in the region. His small farm was his pride, and each year he tended to the soil with care, ensuring his crops were healthy and abundant. The potatoes he grew were renowned for their freshness and quality, making him a reliable supplier to the nearby market. The vendor at the market, a man named Zane, was known for being shrewd and quick with his transactions. He would arrive early each morning, carefully inspecting every item brought to him by the farmers. His sharp eye for business allowed him to sell produce at a decent profit, but he wasn't above taking advantage of the farmers when he could. One crisp autumn morning, Harun loaded his truck with sacks of freshly harvested potatoes, ready to head to the city market. The air was filled with the smell of earth and promise as he drove through the winding roads, eager to make his sale. When he arrived at the market, Zane greeted him with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ah, Harun, you've brought me your best again, I'm sure. Let me take a look." Harun unloaded the sacks, placing them carefully on the stall. The potatoes were plump, smooth, and the perfect shade of brown. Zane, however, began to inspect them with a scrutinizing gaze, poking and prodding with a level of intensity that made Harun uneasy. After a few moments of silence, Zane scoffed. "These potatoes, they're rotten, Harun. Look at this one and this one," he said, pointing to a few potatoes near the bottom of the sack. "I can't sell these, they're no good." Harun's heart sank. But those are fine. I just harvested them yesterday. There's nothing wrong with them," he protested. Zane shook his head. "I'm afraid you'll have to take them back. I can only buy what's perfect. I'll give you half of what we agreed upon, and that's generous given the condition of these potatoes." Harun felt a knot tighten in his chest. He was already struggling to make ends meet. The thought of taking his potatoes back after hauling them all the way into the city was unbearable. But Zane was the only vendor who consistently bought his produce, and without him, Harun wouldn't know what to do. With a sigh, Harun agreed, though every part of him resented the unfairness of it. Zane took the sacks, and Harun left with a small sum that barely covered his expenses. Days passed, and Harun's hope slowly faded as he continued to work his land, trying to make sense of the loss. He couldn't understand why Zane would take advantage of him like that when he had always provided good potatoes. But things were about to change. One afternoon, as Harun worked in the fields, a man named Farid came to visit him. Farid was a neighbor, known for his wisdom and fairness in business. He had heard of Harun's troubles with Zine and wanted to help. Farid had been in the city once or twice and knew how the vendors there operated. He also knew that a man like Zine, who had a reputation for exploiting the farmers, could be brought to justice. "Harun," Farid said as he approached, "I've been hearing things. Zane has been taking advantage of many good farmers. He's not just squeezing you, he's doing this to others too." Harun nodded solemnly. "I don't know what to do. Without him, I have no way of selling my potatoes." Farid smiled, his eyes gleaming with a spark of mischief. "You don't need Zane, but if you want to make sure he gets what's coming to him, I've got a plan. We can turn this around." Farid explained that Zane had a reputation for being greedy and deceitful, but the city's market authorities were unaware of his tactics. Together, they could expose him. The idea was simple but clever. Harun would deliver a load of perfect potatoes to Zane, but this time with a twist. Hidden in the middle of the sacks would be a few rotten potatoes, carefully placed where Zane would find them. Then they would turn the tables. The next morning, Harun loaded his truck with freshly harvested potatoes once again, but this time with a handful of rotten ones strategically mixed in. He drove to the market, his heart pounding with anticipation. Farid was waiting nearby, watching from a distance. As Zane began his inspection, Harun stood back, pretending to be nervous. Sure enough, Zane quickly found the rotten potatoes and began to scowl. "I knew it. These potatoes are spoiled, Harun. You're trying to deceive me," he shouted, his voice dripping with accusation. Harun raised his hands in mock surrender. "But Zane, look at the rest of them. I don't understand. These were fine when I picked them yesterday." Zane sneered. "Don't try to play games with me. I'll only pay you a fraction of what we agreed on. You're lucky I'm even buying them at all." Just as Zayn was about to finish his inspection, Farid stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "Actually, Zayn," Farid said, his voice steady and firm, "I've been watching you for some time now. I've heard enough complaints from farmers who've suffered because of your tricks. You've been cheating good people out of their money, and I have proof of it." Zayn's face turned pale as Farid pulled out a document from his coat, a record of the complaints and a report on Zayn's dishonest practices. "I suggest you make things right, Zayn, or I'll make sure the authorities know about your little scheme," Farid said. The crowd that had gathered around the market stall began to murmur, and Zayn's usual confidence faltered. For the first time he saw the consequences of his greed staring him in the face. Farid's plan had worked. Zayn's smug demeanor crumbled, and he reluctantly agreed to pay Harun the full price they had originally discussed. However, Zayn's arrogance didn't completely vanish. Instead of making a quiet exit, he shouted, "Fine, you win today." Harun, now more wary than ever, took his money and left the market. Farid's strategy had temporarily put Zayn in his place, but Harun knew that the vendor's hunger for power and control would eventually drive him to seek retribution. It wasn't the end of the struggle, just a brief victory. Weeks passed, and Zayn's retaliations became subtle. He started spreading rumors about Harun's produce, claiming that his potatoes were of poor quality. Customers in the market began to doubt Harun's goods, and his sales dropped dramatically. The market was a tough place to survive, and Harun found himself losing ground once again. One evening, after weeks of silent suffering, Harun sat in his small home, pondering his next move. It was then that he realized something important. He didn't need to rely on Zayn or anyone else in the market. He had been proud of his potatoes, his work, and his honesty, but now he would learn to be proud of his resilience. He would find new ways to sell his crops, maybe directly to consumers or even through other small markets. The next time he drove into the city, it wasn't to meet Zayn. Harun found a new vendor who appreciated the quality of his potatoes and paid a fair price for them. His business grew steadily, and his reputation began to recover. He didn't need revenge. He needed to keep working hard to build something stronger than the petty tricks of one greedy vendor. As for Zayn, he remained a fixture at the market, but slowly, the other farmers began to take notice of his dishonest ways. One by one, they stopped dealing with him, refusing to sell him their produce. Eventually, his stall sat empty, and the whispers of his deceit faded into the background. In the end, Harun's greatest victory wasn't in exposing Zayn. It was in learning to stand on his own, unaffected by the greed of others, and building a future through hard work and integrity. And though he'd suffered, he knew that sometimes the best